Welcome to the Citizen Media Expert Interview Series. Ashoka Changemakers, with the support of Google, launched Citizen Media, a global innovation competition to find solutions that use media to catalyze participatory citizenship. In this series, we'll connect with media experts from around the world to explore major trends, obstacles, and what lies ahead.
Welcome to the Citizen Media Expert Interview Series, hosted by the Ashoka Changemakers Citizen Media Competition, with support from Google. Joining us is Nihar Kothari, the director and executive editor of the Patrika Group, one of India's largest media conglomerates. He is currently in charge of editorial planning and readership development of Patrika's flagship publication, Rajasthan Patrika, one of the most widely read Hindi daily newspapers in India. 2.75 million copies are circulated every day across 7 states of India to an astounding readership of over 20 million. Today, we've asked Nihar to discuss trends and promising directions for news media in India. Thank you for joining us, Nihar.
You're welcome.
To start, could you acquaint our global listeners with Rajasthan Patrika? For example, if we were to open up today's edition, what kind of information would we find there, and who are your readers?
Just to give you a little background about the organization, it's almost 6 decades old now. It's now in 7 states in the country. In the newspaper, the Patrika Group is a pretty large media entity which has interests in newspapers as well as radio, outdoor television, a little bit of new media, which is new to India now. We're investing much more resources. Broadly speaking, if you were to look at India, it's amongst the top 3 newspapers in Hindi. And just to give a sense of what language is in India, there is no English newspaper amongst the top 10 newspapers if you were to look at the Indian scene. Just to give you a sense of the size looks big, it's a big group. In terms of if you were to open a newspaper of this morning, we basically come out with more than 110 editions of the newspaper. So every district which we cover has 6 pages dedicated to, out of the 24 to 30 pages, it's almost 6 to 8 pages in every city are completely local, and which are operating almost as 28 different newspapers in their own areas. So there is a part of the newspaper which is completely local involved, and there is one major part which is national, international business. Readership-wise, it's a mass media, so we are pretty much all over the place. I was just going over a few numbers. Depending on which market we are, almost from amongst any Hindi readers, 68 to 85% of the readers read a Patrika. And they are pretty well split between age, gender, income, and education. So if you were to split them, it's pretty much across the board. So the readers are pretty much represent the entire market size.
Could you also talk about some of the major trends in media consumption in India? What are the technologies, in addition to print, that people are using to access the news?
Just coming back to India, what I like comparing most of the time is you got to look at India almost like Europe. It is equally, I would say even larger. The diversity is immense. We have 18 official languages. So when we are looking at media per se in India, I think it is in a way, India is a myth in the sense that it is a group of almost 30 countries within itself. Just to give you an example or sense of what I'm saying, amongst the 2 markets which we operate in, state of Rajasthan versus a state of Chhattisgarh, they are completely 2 different eras in terms of media habits and consumption. So if I was to talk about Rajasthan, which is a state where, the entire spectrum has people from right till the latest technology of a satellite phone to a mobile phone, 3G, to completely not connected with news. But if you look at Rajasthan versus the Chhattisgarh, I would say that if people in Rajasthan, to an extent, the numbers I have, if I add television and radio with the print, the reach almost goes up to 80% of the people get news from these mass media. But as soon as you go to Chhattisgarh, the numbers drop down to almost 55%. And if you were to add the word independent sources, most of the news going out in the rural part of the country still is owned and controlled by the government as well. So they run the largest television channels. The only radio stations that can carry news in India are owned by the government. The private radio stations don't have permission or access to broadcasting news yet. So if you were to broadly ask me, I think it is pretty well spread. So if you were to look at urban cities, the bigger towns which we keep reading about, the Delhis and the Mumbai, those cities, I would say close to 100% people have access to new media as well as mass media. But as soon as you go down where the India resides and look at the vernacular or a language newspaper market, market. I think I would say broadly, if you were to put India together and if you were to put it with independent sources of news, I would say almost 50-55% of the people get news from independent sources. Otherwise, most of it is colored news. That's my guess.
In terms of people who do have access to digital technology, how popular are citizen media tools like social networking and blogging? Have these tools changed the way that people access the news and share information?
Christy, again, come back to India. So everything is going to be huge here.
Sure.
The sheer size of the country itself, numbers are huge, right? So if you were to look at the list of the top social networking sites worldwide, India fares quite well. Among the top 3-5 in most of these sites. But I would say it's still very limited to the urban markets. One, because of the reach in terms of the networks and connectivity available. Second, I would mention again is language. These restrict, or the reach itself is restricted to English. And when you're looking at media consumption habits in India, English is a single-digit percentage in the total scope or the size of the media market in the country. So that has a little bit of a limitation, if you were to say, but the numbers are growing, with the reach increasing. Mobile is becoming faster than the web, for sure, because the reach is faster and it has reached people. Recently, I was visiting Japan, and it's very interesting, after which the entire visit was around the fact, or to explore, how those people have completely, to an extent, can't even speak English. People who are running the best mobile companies or the best web businesses. And they are completely running a parallel system, sometimes even smarter than what is available online in English, in Japanese. And I think India now needs to explore going forward with its own languages as well for it to be able to reach faster and deeper in the country.
In addition to the sheer diversity of languages and cultures, what do you feel are the biggest challenges facing journalism and running a mass news media organization in India today?
Let me just begin by just a small mention of a global challenge, which I think sitting in a business setup as well as a journalist.
Absolutely.
It's so amazing that the journalism news business is now being called media and entertainment. And you add the word industry to it, it makes complete joke, right? There is a media organization which is now categorized as media and entertainment, which completely pulls you down to dumb down the news, compete for the eyeballs or numbers without people participation with a television broadly as a channel. And when you call it an industry, the only metric to measure a successful media company becomes profit. And so I think it's a bigger global issue. But when you come to think about India and a place where I work, most of my journalistically time I've spent, I think there are a few issues. First one I feel is independence. I think slowly, because of the business model or the pressure or the entire economic change where people come by equity and slowly becoming a more business-owned entity, independence itself becomes a big issue. How far can you go to push news to be maybe anti-establishment? Because at the end of the day, it could hurt your business. And so what becomes priority is a big issue. And I think that's starting to happen in India. Very, very few newspapers are now left which are either completely family-owned or, a majority still remains with people who remain with the initial cause of the paper. It's like, if you look at a hospital, it's like saying a doctor gets a cut on the entire bill of the patient at the hospital, right? It's funny. And linked with this is the second issue which India has been recently facing, the entire problem about paid news. I think that's becoming a big challenge in this fraternity because media is powerful. And in democracies, they have a pretty big say. It's amazing, and again, I'll mention because it's a new market, we have been there only for 2 years. The market of Chhattisgarh, every newspaper company in Chhattisgarh owns either a coal mine or is into a power project. Both are known in terms of how the government allots it, except a Patrika in that market. So I'm just saying that it's different ways how news gets influenced. And the third biggest problem I think media organizations are facing in India is they've become too huge to connect with the local concerns. And once you become too large, it's like we're saying 2.75 million readers of a Patrika. But when you split it down to say it's 110 editions, everybody has a separate editor, still trying to remain locally connected. Otherwise, it's very difficult to co-create news with readers and engage them into participative activities. So I think even when they remain large, the name remains the same. They got to still remain community newspapers and connect. Otherwise, it's almost television.
I was hoping you could speak a little bit more about maintaining independence in reporting. I read recently that a BBC Reuters survey ranked Rajasthan Patrika among the 3 most trusted newspapers in India. In your opinion, what creates trust between a newspaper and its readers?
I'm happy you brought this up because it's something we really cherish and celebrate in the organization. Just to mention, founder of the newspaper was very clear of not writing long mission or vision for the organization. He, in Hindi, said, Pathak sarvopari hai. And that goes on to mean that, like we say in the new world, customer is the king. The reader is the only one who you serve. And in judging any news, whether it's of interest or should it go into print or not, has to be completely done by every editor sitting and editing that piece of news to figure out whether it's in the interest of the mass and people at large. And I think the key remains here with the trust is we in Patrika say that it's a newspaper with a soul. The core is what we remain the closest to all the time. I mean, it's a, just to give you an example, I think it's very important to look at what's going on, because the kind of campaigns and news items we're trying to do, just to give you an example, one of the areas where we operate, and it's a huge area of our readership, is every 2 years or 3 years gets affected by drought, very huge problems with water. And every 2 years again, the newspaper actually gets its readers together to fight its own drought. So readers in urban centers, cities, etc., contribute a fistful of grain, collect it at offices, schools, children, everybody come together. And then the readers come along with Patrika reporters in terms of where the need is, go along, distribute. And we do almost 110 lorries in the last round we did 110 truck full of just grain, which was redistributed. So just people participation, millions of people join hands, fight their own local problems and go back to it. So the trust is with participation, having local concern and commitment that they are going to remain supreme irrespective of who is in power and try to remain independent completely. Forbes is doing a very interesting story on us. I think the next issue on the Indian Independence Day, they're coming out with the Forbes Indian edition, is going to do a story on Patrika's role in strengthening democracy on grassroots. So just an example again of the kind of work it does and gets people connected.
Looking ahead, with the anniversary of Indian independence on the horizon, what do you feel are the most promising opportunities in the Indian media space?
Externally speaking, as a country, I think times are really exciting. I mean, technology is coming in really fast. It's getting cheap, so it's accessible to people. And with technology, the truth about Indian demographics is that this country is going to remain young for some time. And that becomes a great mix for people with news to reach out. Democracy remains the key source, and media has to play a very big role. But one thing I think is the biggest opportunity when we say that media is the fourth estate in terms of has a key role in democratic functioning, I think the key thing which we at Patrika appreciate is that the longest any institution amongst the four in a democratic system can be thought of by media alone. I mean, there are governments which come in between 3 to 5 years. The entire setup is not geared to think beyond 5 to 7 years or anything longer. But the key thing which remains with us is we got to think 25, 30, 100 years beyond. And I think that's an important responsibility of media here. The entire urban campaign we are running currently has to do around, we're focusing currently on public transport and low-income housing. Just to figure out, we're completely running a campaign in entire region, in all the 7 states, to push the governments to create more cities. The whole urban problem of slums, unplanned cities, and suddenly it is expected that by 2030, 40% of India will be living in cities. And we don't have cities. So I'm just saying that who's going to think about it? I mean, it's not even a political agenda or not even into a manifesto of any party. But just to give you an idea, I mean, the whole sense we feel is that longest anybody can think and campaign for has to be done by media. I mean, you'd be happy to know that a lot of campaigns Patrika ran are actually laws of the land in the markets where we exist. I mean, they've actually been legislated upon and have become laws. So, and that's a bigger role in media can play in the country itself going forward.
For our final question, do you have any advice for growing social entrepreneurs who are starting or growing a citizen media organization?
I don't know if I can give them advice. I mean, everybody's doing phenomenal stuff. I was going through a few of the applications. I think it's impressive. But just to share a few of my beliefs, the key thing I really believe is that you got to remain absolutely stuck to the core. Why you got into existence can never be lost. 5 years, 10 years, 20 years down the line, however financial viable you become, however much profit you start making. And the second very strong belief, and we are actually running one of the largest journalism awards worldwide. We give around $11,000 every year in the name of our founder. And that award goes to a team of journalists. I think the biggest problem journalists face is that they're used or trained to work independently, just alone. And if we collaborate and partner, and especially in the online, the new media, citizen media sphere, if people start coming together, they may come from different backgrounds, different reasons why they got into media. The power of teams has not even been touched by journalists. And if that can happen, if they can collaborate and cooperate, I think sky is the limit. These are just two beliefs I believe in the sphere of media. You could call them advice as well.
Okay, Nihar Kothari, Director and Executive Editor of the Patrika Group. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Christy.